Well, good morning. We'll continue with the next panel, which will be about green infrastructure, which is practically the necessity to support e-mobility, as presented by the previous speakers in the previous panel. And the title will be Green Infrastructure, the Path to Sustainable Growth in a Climate-Neutral Economy. And we're very happy to have with us two distinguished speakers. I think one of the most responsible persons in Greece to talk about infrastructure in the transportation sector is the Minister, Mr. Kostas Karamanlis, who will give the first talk of this panel. And after that, there will be His Excellency Matthew Lodge, who is the ambassador, the newly appointed ambassador of United Kingdom in Greece. So please, both of you, join me to the panel. And we'll start with two presentations and then a short discussion.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, let me begin by taking off my mask, of course. Let me begin by thanking Mr. Papaefthimiou for inviting me in this forum, congratulating you and the other hosts for a truly flawless organization. I think that we all agree that public dialogue should primarily focus on how faster to recover from the devastating consequences of the pandemic. Therefore, I'm particularly glad to participate in this important dialogue, but I'm also very glad to have the honor today to count the presence of the new ambassador of the United Kingdom, Ambassador Lodge. Welcome back to Greece. My best wishes for a creative and fruitful term. As you are mostly probably aware, the Ministry of Infrastructure and Transport has a pretty vast scope, and we all work relentlessly to contribute to the main goal of Prime Minister Mitsotakis' government. And that is to basically put Greece back to track, back on the road to progress and development. And I believe that we are achieving gradually these goals. To this end, we are definitely trying to resolve very complex and long-standing issues. Sustainable development is a key factor to our planning, both in the infrastructure sector, where we are prioritizing projects with a significant environmental footprint, and the transport sector, where we worked methodically towards a greener, more efficiently and environmentally friendly modes of transport. Issues like the environment and the climate change are today on the top of every politician's agenda. I dare to say that these issues are also becoming quite, quote unquote, fashionable, and various and different approaches have been tabled on how to deal with the climate change challenges that we are facing. The European Green Deal sets out a detailed vision of how to make Europe the first climate neutral continent by 2050. This is an extremely ambitious goal. This requires current greenhouse emissions levels to drop substantially, and an intermediate step towards climate neutrality. The EU has raised its 2030 climate ambition, committing to cutting emissions by at least 55%. Within this framework, cycle economy and sustainable developments are top priorities in every member state, and especially here in Greece. And here in Greece, they constitute the central core of our planning for infrastructure projects. A plan of over 13 billion euros all over the country, as well as our initiatives to the transport sector. To this end, let me allow me to turn your attention on the topic of greening the transport sector. What does this mean? For our ministry, we have to promote the shift from road transport to railways. We all agree that Greece is on par with its modern motorways with most member states of the European Union. But we should all acknowledge that the future projects have to be based on rail, especially in Greece, where our rail system has a number of problems and we have to overcome a lot of challenges. To this end, we invest on rail networks, infrastructure, superstructure, systems, electrification, signaling, telecommanding. As of today, in the past 26, we have already launched tenders of approximately 400 million euros, mostly related to the problematic system, and we are trying to modernize that, of what we call the Patras, Athens, Thessaloniki, Idomeni, and Promachonas axis. These projects are not the ones that are only important. In the next few weeks, the government will announce the biggest tendering process of railroad projects, approximately 3.3 billion. But these projects are going to be projects that are going to be turnkey with a method of the competitive dialogue so that we don't have delays as we are used to see in the previous years. Second, e-mobility for urban public transport. Greece has one of the oldest bus fleets in the European Union. This needs to stop, and it has stopped because we are promoting zero and low emission buses. In fact, zero emission buses will be the sole option after 2023 in the European Union. We have prepared, and this tender is as we speak on air, the first tender for the new renewal of the bus fleet in Athens and Thessaloniki. This involves 770 buses. After years without any investment, we will actually purchase 350 electrical buses. This is one of the biggest numbers in any European capital, 120 hybrid buses, and 300 CNG buses. Third, we invest on what we call our metro systems, our underground railway systems, both in Athens and in Thessaloniki. We are working very hard to deliver a contemporary metro system in Thessaloniki after so many years that this project has been stalled. And we, as we speak, have started construction to the core works of the Metro Line 4 in Athens, another project that was stalled and delayed for a number of years. The continuation of these investments, I think, show the path and shows that this is a priority for our two metropolitan centers of our country. Similar needs for modernization and strengthening of urban transport exist in other urban centers, in other smaller cities of our countries. In this framework, what is extremely important is the Sustainable Urban Mobility Plans, SUMP as we call them, e-mobility and mild mobility. The legislation has already been voted in Parliament, and now the municipalities and local governments have to implement these ambitious plans. Lastly, but I think most importantly, we have set a very, very ambitious goal. By 2030, 1 out of 3 cars to be electric. The numbers from 2020 to 2021 are astonishing. I think one of your previous speakers presented the numbers. Right now, during the last year, we have made significant progress along our 5 major motorways and with the strong cooperation of the public and the private sector. Right now, as we speak, if you have an electric car, you can go from Athens to Thessaloniki and you will have rechargeable posts every 100 kilometers. I think this is something which is extremely important. The numbers of charging spots will reach 2,000 by 2025. They will reach 12,000. And the goal, a very ambitious goal, is that by 2030, we will reach 25,000 chargers. Through our comprehensive policy, through our strategy, electrification is here. It has begun. And I think that everyone acknowledges that. However, let me stress this. E-mobility is not only a race. It is important to secure a fair transition period as countries do not have the same starting point. This is something that has also been acknowledged in a European level. I would like to underline 3 main points in my closing remarks. Firstly, no one can deny that climate change and the environmental degradation are a real threat. To overcome these challenges, Europe has, but needs to develop, I think, a better growth strategy that will transform the European Union into a modern, resource-efficient, and competitive economy. Second, in order to achieve all these very ambitious goals, it is necessary to lay out the very important measures of legislations and investment incentives, and at the same time, to mobilize both public and private funding as much as we can. And thirdly, and this is extremely important in my view, especially in Greece, I think that we have a long way to go to raise public awareness in this extremely important topic of climate change. Nothing can be achieved without everyone's help, without civic society's help, and without the citizens' contribution, especially when we're talking about the future of our planet. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Minister. So, Mr. Ambassador, the floor is yours. Please speak in English. I know that you might prefer talking in Greek, but...
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Papaefthimiou. Minister, Your Excellency, it's a great pleasure to follow you speaking this morning and to be here. So thank you for the invitation and thank you for the opportunity to present something of the UK's experience and our approach, our vision for how we can put in place the necessary green infrastructure to ensure sustainable growth. And it's not just a coincidence that here on the 1st of October, with exactly a month to go before the COP26 meetings in Glasgow, which I think will be the biggest international gathering that the United Kingdom has hosted, certainly in recent years, and where we're very much looking forward to having Prime Minister Mitsotakis there, along with probably 100 or so other world leaders. And it's in that context that I'm pleased to talk today about how the United Kingdom and indeed the European Union are making common cause and have committed together to a net zero future. We're very proud in the UK to be the first major economy to have legislated for net zero emissions by 2050. And of course, as we've heard from Minister Karamanlis, the European Union has committed to be climate neutral in 2050, delivered through the European Green Deal. An important element I want to bring out this morning, though, is how, from the British experience, we are convinced that this drive towards net zero is also a positive driver for economic growth. Over the last 30 years, the UK economy has grown by 78%, whilst we have managed so far to cut emissions by 44%. And as with our European partners, we have a major plan of investment to drive this forward. Prime Minister Johnson announced a 10-point plan for a green industrial revolution, mobilising some £12 billion of government investment, covering clean energy, transport, nature and innovative technologies, which will also create and support up to 250,000 jobs and will accelerate our path to net zero. Next slide, please. But it's clear, as we've heard from a number of speakers this morning and the Minister himself, that we will not be able to beat the climate change challenge without decarbonising the transport sector. Next slide, please. The transport sector currently accounts for around 23% of total energy-related CO2 emissions. And without immediate action, scientists judge that this will rise or could rise to 40% by 2030. Therefore, in the UK, we're taking decisive action to end the sale of new petrol and diesel cars and vans by 2030. And with all vehicles being required to be 100% zero emissions from 2035. That's just 14 years from now. The UK is fortunate in that we have one of the world's largest clusters of companies developing zero-emission components for electric vehicles. And in 2019, the UK was the second largest market for ultra-low emission vehicles in Europe and is a global leader in their development and manufacture. But what can government do and what is government doing? Well, the British government is injecting some £2.8 billion of government investment to support electrical vehicles and their supply chains, including crucial gigafactories for mass-scale production of batteries and charging infrastructure that we've already heard about. This is part of that 10-point plan for the Green Industrial Revolution and is expected to spur a further £3 billion or so of private investment by 2026. Next slide, please. In order to accelerate the sales of electrical vehicles and support the existing fleet, we aim to make charging as easy as refueling a petrol and diesel car. And for those of you who are studying the news in the UK at the moment, I mean in the general sense, not with the current challenges that we're facing. But the UK already has a network of over 23,000 public charge points, with more fast charge points per 100 miles of key strategic road than any other European country. So that is a massive start, but it is key to us already with an uptake in electrical vehicle ownership that we need to be doing more. In May this year, the Energy Networks Association, the ENA, announced with Ofgem, our regulator, the Office of Gas and Electricity Markets, an accelerated £300 million strategic investment to free up capacity in electricity networks, at least half of which will be used to support electrical vehicles across the whole country. And network operators are taking steps to help motorists charge their vehicles while managing their grids in the most efficient way possible. In July this year, we reduced red tape and bureaucracy with new streamlined connections, a process making it easier for electrical vehicles, including vehicle-to-grid and heat pumps, to be connected to electricity networks. And it is also, listening to the Minister talk about public transport that I'll come on to in a moment, it's also important for our supply chains and infrastructure for businesses and the retail sector that we're able to set a date to phase out the sale of new diesel heavy goods vehicles and to invest in freight trials. And with that, we're investing £20 million next year in trials in order to pioneer hydrogen and zero emission heavy goods vehicles. And a brief word on hydrogen, which is a very topical issue at the moment, and where we are optimistic that it could provide a clean source of fuel and heat for our homes, for transport and industry. And the UK is fortunate to have world-leading electrolyzer companies already and a significant network of carbon capture and storage sites that we hope to maximise. But on to public transport, buses, rail, aviation and shipping. The transition to more active and sustainable transport needs also investment in our rail and bus services, all across Europe, as we've heard in Greece and in the UK, as well as measures to help pedestrians and cyclists. We want to position the UK at the forefront of moves in these areas and also in aviation and maritime technology to push forward low carbon travel and build on the strengths that we are lucky to have in our economy. We're investing in innovative clean technologies, sustainable fuels, zero emission aircraft, as well as into the clean maritime technology, running hydrogen ferry trials and hydrogen refueling ports. So to wrap up, ladies and gentlemen, Minister, the UK is rapidly decarbonising its domestic economy. And thanks to the expertise and investment that is already there in offshore wind power, in electronics for zero-emission vehicles and electric motors, and global leadership in green finance through the City of London, we are successfully exporting goods and services around the world. And I'm proud of the partnerships that are already existing and are flourishing here in Greece. We are encouraging the businesses of the future and the businesses we work with to make robust commitments to a net zero future and to sign up to the UN's Race to Zero campaign. And for European businesses, the United Kingdom provides rich opportunities for investment and scope to build world-beating expertise to support the accelerating transition across Europe. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Ambassador. So I'll start with you, Minister, and I'll stick to your last comment, which was about public engagement and, you know, public engagement in terms of in terms of climate change and how people should really understand what's going on around us in Europe. So, and let's talk about transportation and transport in big cities, which is a critical issue, and it's something that everybody lives every day. So, could you share with us your thoughts about your minister's perception and how you're facing all these challenges that are encrypted in this green transportation in cities, and what kind of measures and initiatives you are planning to undertake in this regard in the near future and maybe in the medium-term future?
Yes, I think that we all acknowledge that, you know, transport is responsible for around 25 to 30% of CO2 emissions. So what is the main goal is to promote public transport. But let's be honest, public transport in this country has had a number of challenges due to the statistic is enough. We haven't renewed our bus fleet from 2009. What did we do when we came into government? First of all, we engaged the public and the private sector. For the first time in the Greek government, we have in Athens and Thessaloniki more than 500 buses through a leasing process. So those are newer buses up to 8 years old. And our average fleet, which was in Thessaloniki around 16 years and in Athens more than 20 years, has been reduced. What is the second step that we are doing? First of all, we have a tendering process in place. We have money from European structural funds and the Resilience and Recovery Fund, so that Athens will very soon be a city that will have, Athens and Thessaloniki, on its streets, more than 200 electrical buses to 250 in Athens and around 100 in Thessaloniki. This is a major development, and we have already agreed with Commissioner Ferreira, who was here yesterday, to support also hybrid buses, and we have also agreed to get CNG buses. So basically, the Athens and Thessaloniki transport network is changing. And keep in mind that as we speak, we have already begun the construction of the Line 4 of Metro. So what we have to do is to create the necessary tools so that the average Athenian and Thessalonican can use a reliable transport system, which, let's be honest, was not in place for a number of years.
It's crucial, and you know, it's very crucial to make people understand that they should go by bus, which could be electric or metro or whatever, and skip, you know, going by car or whatever, which is quite time consuming, and also it's very, not unhealthy for the environment. It's very important. So it needs a change in public perception, how people really think of that, and the
We
measures.
need to have, you're absolutely right, a public perception, but the government is also responsible to provide all the necessary
Exactly.
tools.
Exactly.
There are, I talk to a number of young citizens that don't want, young professionals that don't want to take a car. But they say that if I want to use public transport, it's going to take me 3 times. It's going to take me more time, as much as 3 times more to my job. So basically, it's one thing to say that we have to use public transport, but we have to provide all the necessary incentives and tools, and that is what we are doing with a very, very specific plan and with a very, very developed strategy.
Okay. Ambassador, your presentation was, astonishing, and it's clear that UK is a pioneer in terms of green infrastructure and for the transportation. So, which were the main obstacles that you had to overcome in order to reach to this level of penetration of green vehicles, or whatever vehicles they are, which we call green, either electric or hybrid or whatever?
Well, I think if touching on some of the points that Minister Karamanlis has talked about, you need an environment that is where you've got leadership from the top, from government, so that it facilitates and encourages the journey, but it can't be done by government alone. So for us in the UK, where we continue to benefit from a strong reputation as somewhere of investment and innovation, and it's quite a competitive market inside the UK, those are all circumstances that you can harness as you try and move in this direction. And then I think there's the key point, which we see this across different European economies, where we're not, I think, there yet with the critical mass of infrastructure supporting sales, persuading people of the arguments of why they need to move towards zero-emission vehicles, electric. But we've managed to make some really significant strides. So just to tell a sort of personal tale, I had a conversation with a friend the other day who needed to take somebody somewhere for a medical appointment because of short-term challenges in supply at the petrol stations at the moment in the UK. They were lucky to have an electric vehicle, plug-in hybrid. So for them, it was straightforward. It was a 100-mile journey, and I was saying, well, this is okay. We hear of difficulties, and they're going, no, it's absolutely fine. So that's okay. That's one individual example amongst a population of 60 million people. But we've got to the point now with the charging infrastructure that is there, with a strong popular support, particularly amongst our young people, about, if you like, the moral imperative of tackling climate change, with industry and government working together to develop and put in place the technology needed. And so we're seeing a momentum generated that is already delivering results. And talking now to people who are planning to replace their family car, for most people apart from their home, probably the single biggest investment that a family will make. Most people now are saying, well, we need to buy a hybrid vehicle, we need to buy an electrical vehicle. And that's a massive shift in a few years. So now what we need to do is to make sure, and we were hearing in the earlier presentation, that concerns around range, around reliability and so on are addressed. And it is going to be a big collective effort, but I think we're optimistic about the distance we've already come.
And as you mentioned in your presentation was subsidization, I think, in several aspects of your indigenous industry related to, all aspects of electromobility or, green transportation. So I think that's also a key priority for your government. Is it true?
It is true. Yes, it is true. Because I think, governments, much though voters might like them to, and I'm not a politician, but governments can't magic money and investment from nowhere, and there needs to be a drive. And this is where the role of technology, the role of innovation, a partnership between government providing a lead, whether through legislation and other encouragements, and facilitating the necessary investment, but actually empowering businesses, investing in startups, supporting areas of business where, I talked about the gigafactories, to improve battery technology, and working with suppliers to make sure that, or depending on the system, the political systems that one has with local authorities, to ensure that you've got the charging infrastructure in place, to actually move from a concept which everybody agrees is necessary and a good idea, but to something which helps people's daily lives. And if I may, I'm just picking up on the Minister's comments about urban transport. I've just spent the last 4 years in Paris, but equally in London frequently. Those are two cities now where actually you don't want to take a car, and you probably don't really need to own a car, and most people don't, because over years, and it takes time, but the public transport infrastructure is such that journeys are faster, easier, and cheaper if you use public transport. And that's where we need to get to across all the big cities of the world, frankly.
I'll take the lead also for, local industries. And you mentioned a lot about electrification in Greece and how you plan to proceed on that. So what are your detailed plans? Please elaborate a little bit on that. And also if we could see electrification, electromobility as a chance, to boost local industries, small industries that can really engage in technologically innovations that could help us, produce something as a company, because we only produce feta, salata, and souvlaki, and that's something that's really something that should change very fast, I think.
Yes, I think that the government has already given a number of incentives to move in this path. But let me be very blunt. In the past decades, we were trying to boost local industry in order to promote a policy. That doesn't work every time. So I think that we have to be very cautious and very careful. And I agree with Ambassador. We have demonized the private sector in this country for a number of years. So basically, I think what a government should do, and that is what our government is doing, is creating all the necessary incentives in order for those industries to pick up. Because I think that we all agree that we have the human resource capital to do that. I mean, if you go a trip to most of the universities in the UK, you will see a number of brilliant students and brilliant professors who are Greek. So our incentive here is to create our goal here is to create the incentives for these people to come back. And I can tell you from experience that we already see that. We are at this stage, at the first phase, where we see a lot of brain gain, slowly but gradually, especially in the infrastructure sector. Because with all those projects that are basically going on, I mentioned previously that we have a very ambitious program of $13 billion in infrastructure programs. 3.2 billion of those 13 billion have already been contractualized. So they are beginning. The Line 4 is beginning. The Hellenic project, which is the biggest private investment scheme, I think, in Southeastern Europe, is moving according to plans. So we have civil engineers that are now coming back. I think that this is extremely important. So what a government should do is not dominate the market, not create public industries in order to help promote a policy like we did in the past. And I think that the Greek taxpayer paid a very heavy load for these policies of the past, especially in the 1980s. And I think that what a government should do is follow the path of what most liberal governments in the European Union are doing. Give the necessary incentives, full stop.
Okay, thank you both. I would like both of you to have the last comment and conclude, because time is pressing. By a general comment about, sustainable growth, climate neutral economy, green infrastructure, which is the title also with our session, but also please try to make a comment that will be a realistic one. And, we tend to hear all the time about optimism about our sustainable future and energy transition and all that, and tend to forget that we have a lot of issues that are hidden behind us. So please try to conclude by making a balanced comment. Please.
Well, if I may, thank you. I think from my perspective, but also from the British government's perspective, this is about the mindset and about the education of the younger generation. And yes, it's a balanced comment, but it's still going to be an optimistic one.
Okay.
Which is that our young people appreciate, because they're the ones who will live through it, the challenge that we have with climate change. And they are fully behind that. And we see that in their own conversations. And they are the ones who are ready to embrace the opportunities for a greener and more sustainable future that technology is presenting. So our responsibility as the older generation now is to enable them to make a reality of that. Won't happen immediately, but we can be confident because we've got a young generation, certainly across the United Kingdom and across Europe and the West, that understands why this matters and are personally committed to making it a reality.
Minister.
On the same line, something that we never touch upon in conferences like this is what about public awareness? And I think this is extremely important. And if you look at most opinion polls that come out or studies that come out, I think that they all designate that, especially in Greece, public awareness for environmental issues is not the average of the European Union. And this, I think, is extremely important because trying to do the shift to a more greener economy, it has to do with policies, but it has to do with daily life. And I totally agree with ambassadors. We were talking about that while having coffee. I have 3 young kids. They are much more public aware of what's going on when we talk about the transition to a green economy. I would actually say that a lot of the younger generation, I see that they have anxiety problems when it comes to environmental issues. My generation, and I assume all the generations of mine, don't have those sensitivities. And this is something that I think we have to work all in order to raise awareness. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you both for the discussion. It was a pleasure.